Ivy drops bombshell evidence. Dylan arrested for Luna's death. The pressure at Forrester Creations reached an each-time high as Ivy Forrester walked into the grand conference room, her face a blend of determination and fear, carrying a manila brochure thick with substantiation that could shake the foundation of every life connected to the Forrester family. The room went silent as she approached, and indeed Ridge Forrester, generally composed and authoritative, felt a ripple of apprehension course through him. "I can't keep this inside presently," Ivy began, her voice pulsing slightly but resolute. "Everything I've uncovered points to Dylan being involved in Luna's death." Gasps erupted around the room, with Steffy Forrester Finnegan's hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and unbelief. Dylan, who had been leaning against the wall, firmed in place, tried to speak but no words came. The weight of Ivy's blameworthiness pressed down on him like a physical force. Ivy continued, methodically opening the brochure and displaying prints, phone records, and timestamps that strictly linked Dylan to the scene of Luna's last hours, proving he was there when the accident, or was it a deliberate act? Passed. Brooke Logan's face blanched, her generally commanding presence replaced by a nearly childlike fear, while Taylor Hayes reached out artificially to Steffy, brooding solace that did little to mask her own shock. The room's atmosphere was thick with pressure as Ivy laid out every detail: Dylan's inexplainable absences, the disagreement in his statements to the police, and the ruinous videotape footage that placed him at Luna's apartment the night she failed. Carter, Walton, and Ridge changed a grim regard, quietly admitting that this disclosure was further than a bare scuttlebutt. The substantiation was concrete, inarguable, and ruinous. The narrative Ivy painted was chilling in its clarity, each piece of information connecting blotches that no bone had dared to connect ahead. As she spoke, flashbacks of Luna laughing in earlier scenes at Il Giardino, Dylan assuring her after a minor accident, and the subtle moments of pressure between them played in the minds of everyone present, twisting the tragedy into a web of dubitation and heartache. Steffi's hands shook as she tried to attune the Dylan she allowed. She knew with the man being painted by Ivy's exposures, her heart pained at the possibility of treason, and yet the substantiation was necessary. Wyatt Spencer, who had been still observing from the doorway, eventually stepped forward, his voice cutting through the room like a cutter. "We can't ignore what she's showing us," he said, eyes locked on Dylan, who now sounded visibly worsening under the scrutiny. Ivy, seeing the graveness of the moment, took a deep breath, her coming words heavy with futurity. "Dylan needs to be arrested. Not hereafter, not latterly, but now. For Luna. For the verity." The room fell into a stupefied silence, the kind that precedes monumental opinions and unrecoverable conduct. Carter incontinently reached for his phone, ready to communicate the authorities, while Ridge moved to stand beside Dylan, his expression torn between paternal protectiveness and the inarguable signs of guilt that Ivy's substantiation had exposed. Steffi, caught between unbelief and despair, rushed toward Dylan, gripping his arms and shaking him gently, contending, "Dylan, this ain't be true. You wouldn't hurt her, would you?" Dylan's response was a blend of despair, confusion, and anguish, as gashes formed in his eyes, betraying a fermentation that words alone couldn't convey. Ivy watched quietly, her resoluteness unwavering despite the chaos her disclosure had unleashed. She knew the substantiation would speak for itself, but she also understood the heartache it would beget. As the phone chimed in Carter's hand, motioning the morning of unsanctioned disquisition, Brooke's voice broke through the room's pressure. "We need to flash back Luna, not just the horror of her death, but the person she was. We owe her that much," she said, her words a fragile attempt to anchor everyone in the reality of loss amid treason. Taylor stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on Steffi's shoulder, while Wyatt kept his aspect fixed on Dylan, quietly covenanting to support the victim while bracing for the bouleversement this disclosure would bring to their integrated lives. Moments laterally, the distant wail of enchantresses came audible, growing louder as police buses approached, motioning the ineluctable consequences. Dylan, now completely apprehensive of the unrecoverable turn his life had taken, sank into a precedent, head in hands, as Ivy gathered her substantiation and prepared to hand it over officially. The shockwave of this disclosure was immediate. Phone calls buzzed through Forrester Creations as workers rumored among themselves. Rumors began to circulate, and the media's attention, formerly acute after former family dishonors, was now poised to explode. Steffi, still trying to attune the man she loved with the indicted, cleaved to Taylor as Wyatt spoke vocally to her, promising they would find a way through the storm. Ridge, torn between the man he considered a son and the data laid bare in front of him, remained silent, his mind contending with questions of morality, fidelity, and justice. Brooke, ever the strategist, began mentally preparing for the ineluctable fallout, considering statements, controlling narratives, and the preservation of the family's public image. Ivy, despite the fermentation she had unleashed, felt a strange relief the verity, long buried and sorrowfully egregious, was eventually being conceded. As police officers entered the room and formally took Dylan into guardianship, the graveness of the moment was palpable. The echoes of Luna's horse laugh, now tragically silent, sounded to hang in the air as a haunting memorial of lives irrevocably changed. Exchanges erupted as family members tried to grasp the reality. Who could have suspected Dylan, the gentle and caring presence they all trusted? How could one person's conduct have led to similar ruinous consequences? And most pressing of all, how would they navigate the weeks and months ahead, balancing grief, justice, and the complex shade of love and fidelity that bound them together? Ivy, watching Dylan being led down, felt a blend of exculpation and anguish, knowing that while she had done the right thing, the consequences for all involved would be profound and long-lasting. The story, far from over, had only just begun. Secrets would continue to unravel, connections would be tested, and the formerly putatively stable world of Forrester creations would now ever be marked by Luna's woeful death and the shocking disclosure of Dylan's involvement. As the dust settled shortly, Steffy rumored through her gashes, "We'll survive this ever." A fragile stopgap amid the desolation, while Ridge, Brooke, and Taylor changed solemn ganders, each quietly admitting that the coming chapters of their lives would demand courage, verity, and an unvarying commitment to the family they cherished. Indeed, as the murk of treason dallied ominously over every decision they made. The day had started like any other at Forrester Creations, with sun streaming through the vast glass windows and the soft murmur of workers settling into their routines. Yet beneath the face, pressure coddled like magma ready to erupt. Ivy Forrester, generally reserved and careful, had spent hours strictly organizing every piece of substantiation she had collected over weeks, her hand shaking slightly as she filed prints, dispatches, and vids into a neat mound. Each point was a dagger of verity aimed at Dylan, and though her heart pained at the study of betraying someone she had formerly considered a friend, she knew the cost of silence was far too great. Luna's death had left a hole in all of their lives, and Ivy could no longer tolerate the study that the person responsible might walk free, while the family suffered in ignorance. As Ivy walked toward the conference room, she felt the weight of every step, her heels clicking sprucely against the polished bottoms. Ridge, seated at the head of the room reviewing designs, tasted her approach and looked up. His brow furrowed, a flicker of apprehension crossing his typically composed features. "Ivy," he asked cautiously, "what's going on?" Steffy, seeing the pressure, looked up from her own office, curiosity and worry warring in her expression. "Ivy, you look serious. What's it?" Ivy opened the door, holding the thick brochure like a guard. "I've substantiation that Dylan was involved in Luna's death," she said, her voice steady despite the earthquake in her hands. The words landed like a blast. Silence swallowed the room. Steffy's president screamed slightly as she spun toward Dylan, who had been still standing by the wall, trying to look composed. His expression shifted from casual concern to commodity undecipherable, also to sheer fear. "What?" he said eventually, his voice slightly above a tail. "You know exactly what I mean," Ivy replied, her eyes unvarying. She began laying out the contents of the brochure on the conference table: photos of Dylan near Luna's apartment that night, timestamps from his phone records, screenshots of textbooks he'd tried to cancel, and indeed a scrap of videotape footage showing him entering the structure at an insolvable hour. Brooke Logan, seated near the far end of the room, blanched visibly, pressing a hand to her mouth. This can't be true," she muttered, though the substantiation on the table told a story far too clear to dismiss. Taylor Hayes reached for Steffy's hand, gripping it tightly. "We've to be careful," she rumored, her eyes fluttering between Dylan and the prints on the table. "But the verity needs to be faced." Dylan, feeling the walls near and around him, tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Sweat drilled his forepart as he plotted for countenance. I can explain," he began, voice cracking. Ivy shook her head. Explain what, Dylan? How you were at Luna's apartment the night she failed. How the substantiation places you there without injustification. It's all then. It can't be ignored. Wyatt Spencer, who had been leaning against the doorway, crossed the room and placed a hand on Dylan's shoulder, though his grip was gentle, nearly questioning. Dylan, if this isn't what it seems, you need to speak up. But the substantiation, his voice traced off, heavy with mistrustfulness. Steffy's hand shook, the consummation of what Ivy was criminating Dylan of crashing into her like a tidal surge. Dylan, please tell me this isn't true. Luna, she didn't earn this. Gashes formed at the corners of her eyes, and she gripped his shoulders, hopeless for some scrap of consolation. Dylan's aspect dropped, unfit to meet hers. I didn't mean for any of this to be, he said eventually, voice small and broken. I no way wanted her to. I no way wanted her to die. Ridge fitted sprucely, his tone controlled but edged with wrathfulness. Because from where we're standing, it sure aesthetics like your conduct led to her death. Accidental or not, Dylan, people are going to be held responsible. Ivy slid the final piece of substantiation across the table, a security camera clip showing Dylan leaving the apartment complex moments after Luna's fall. There was no nebulosity in the footage. His presence was inarguable. Carter Walton, standing hard, pulled out his phone. I need to call the authorities. Dylan, you're going to have to come with me, he said forcefully, though his eyes were filled with disinclination. He'd always believed in justice, but he also knew the desolation this arrest would bring to everyone involved. Steffy cleaved to Dylan, blubbing. Still. Please don't leave me. Please tell me this isn't true. Taylor wrapped an arm around her son, brooding vocally, trying to soothe her despite the fermentation swirling around them. Brooke moved to Ridge's side, her face pale but composed, the maternal instinct remonstrating in damage control, family protection, and Verity operation all at formerly. The distant sound of enchantresses began to filter in from the road, growing louder. Ivy, standing back and observing the chaos she had unleashed, felt a strange admixture of relief and anguish. The Verity was eventually coming to light, but at what cost? Dylan's shoulders sagged as the officers entered. His hands were raised slightly in rendition, his expression concave. The room sounded to shrink around him, every tale, every regard a memorial of the graveness of the situation. Steffi reached out, her fritters brushing his arm, and he could only manage a ghost of a smile, pigmented with remorse. Wyatt placed a hand gently on Steffi's back. We'll get through this together, he said still. His words were more stopgap than pledge, but in that moment it was enough to anchor her. As Dylan was attended out, the room remained frozen in stupefied silence. Brooke's eyes scrutinized the faces of her family and associates, fading the fractures that would inescapably appear. We've to be strong, she said vocally. For Luna. For ourselves. And for the family we're trying to cover. Taylor, her aspect, moping on Steffi, knew that mending would not come snappily. There would be gashes, arguments, and nights of insomniac reflection. But the first step, facing the Verity, had been taken. Ivy exhaled, her resoluteness establishment. She had done what she believed was right, indeed if it meant betraying someone she had watched for. And in the stillness, with enchantresses fading into the distance and the weight of reality settling over Forrester creations, everyone understood that nothing would ever be the same again. The reverberations of Dylan's arrest for Luna's death would echo through their lives, altering connections, commitment, and futures in ways none of them could yet comprehend. The silence in the room after Dylan was taken into guardianship was nearly unsupportable. Steffi remained frozen, sitting in her president as if the bottom itself could hold her steady. Taylor's hand stayed on her shoulder, but indeed the comforting touch couldn't stop the earthquake in her son's hands. Brooke, ever the dame, moved toward the window, gaping out at the megacity road below where the police auto had just pulled down, lights flashing quietly, a stark memorial of reality hitting hard. I can't believe this, Steffi rumored, her voice breaking. Dylan, Luna, it's like the world just fell piecemeal. Taylor gently pulled her into a clinch, brushing a hand through her hair. I know, honey. I know it feels insolvable right now. But we've to let the law handle it. That's the only way we recognize Luna's memory. Wyatt remained near Steffi, a defensive presence, his jaw tight as he reused what had just happened. His own passions for Steffy made the moment indeed more unsupportable. He wanted to reach out, to promise that everything would be okay, but he knew that was insolvable, not until the verity was completely revealed and the dust settled. Meanwhile, Ivy stood still near the table, folding her arms as she watched the fallout. She felt a stitch of guilt seeing Steffy's desolation. Part of her had anticipated wrathfulness, yes, perhaps indeed abomination, but this raw heartache was nearly too important to bear. Still, she reminded herself that the verity could no longer be buried. Luna merited justice. Carter, putting away his phone, eventually spoke. "We did the right thing. Dylan's presence at the scene is proved. That's irrefragable substantiation. The authorities will handle the disquisition from then. Now we need to concentrate on supporting everyone differently affected." He turned to Brooke. "You'll need to prepare statements, make sure the workers know what's passing, and manage the media once this goes public." Brooke jounced solemnly. "I'll handle it. But I don't know how we'll explain this to the family, especially Hope. She adored Luna. This will break her fully." At that, Ridge eventually spoke, his voice low and measured, though underscored with pressure. "We've to keep Steffy together. That's precedence number one. However, nothing differently will count if she collapses under the weight of this." He glanced at Taylor. "Do you suppose she can manage?" Taylor gave a short, grim nod. "We'll get through it together. But it won't be easy. Nothing about this situation is easy." As the grown-ups tried to regroup, Steffy's mind contended with recollections of Dylan and Luna, their horse laugh in Il Giardino, the late-night walks, Dylan's quiet solace when Luna had sounded upset about small effects. How could the same man who had assured Luna now be indicted of involvement in her death? The contradiction was unsupportable. Wyatt noticed her aspect, drifting toward the doorway where Dylan had faded. "Steffy, I know it's hard. But he's gone now, and there's nothing you can do at this moment except let the authorities handle it," Wyatt said gently. Steffy shook her head. "Gash is discovering freely now. But what if he's shamefaced? What if Luna, what if I no way see him again, or worse, what if it's all true?" Taylor tensed her hold on her son. "We'll find out the verity, Steffy. And whatever it is, we'll face it together. Right now you need to let yourself feel, but also flash back you're not alone." Meanwhile, Ivy returned to her office trying to gather herself. She had anticipated some battle, perhaps wrathfulness from Dylan, but she hadn't anticipated the emotional fallout on everyone differently. Indeed, Brooke, who had seen decades of Forrester drama, sounded shaken. The air felt heavy, rough, charged with grief, treason, and unbelief. Latterly that evening, the Forrester family gathered in the living room of the manse. Steffy sat on the settee wrapped in a soft mask, her eyes red and fluffy from crying. Taylor poured tea and handed it to her, hoping the warmth would bring some small comfort. Wyatt sat beside her, holding her hand gently. Brooke and Ridge stood hard, each lost in study, while Ivy dallied at the reverse of the room, doubtful whether to speak or remain silent. Brooke eventually broke the silence. "We need to flash back Luna for who she was, not just for how she failed. She was full of life, full of kindness, and she wouldn't want us tearing ourselves piecemeal over wrathfulness or allegations." Steffy took a shaky belt of her tea. "I know, but it's insolvable not to suppose about what could have been, what might have happened else. And Dylan, I can't indeed imagine what he's going through. Indeed, if he did this, indeed if he's shamefaced, I loved him. I can't just forget that." Wyatt squeezed her hand. "You don't have to forget, Steffy. You just have to survive this. That's all we can do for now." Taylor chimed in. "We'll help you, Steffy. Every step of the way. You're not alone." Ivy eventually spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "I know I've caused a lot of pain, but Luna deserves justice. And if Dylan was involved, indeed in part it can't be ignored. I wish effects were different, but the verity is the only way to recognize her memory." Steffy's aspect shifted to Ivy, her grief mingled with confusion. "Ivy, I don't detest you. I can't indeed process all of this yet. But I appreciate that you came forward, indeed if it hurts." The night strengthened and the family remained in a fragile silence, each lost in their own studies, trying to attune the life they had known with the shocking new reality. Outdoors, the megacity lights twinkled, indifferent to the particular tragedy unfolding within the manse walls. The coming morning, Forrester Creations buzzed with rumors. Workers rumored in hall